Miracle at Camp Friendship. Chapter 7. Early to Bed. When supper was finished, and with Drill Sergeant Mr. Franson leading the way with his flashlight, we all trudged out of the dining hall and headed toward our lodges. Warmth and security were left behind as the night surrounded us. The air was quite cool now, and the cicadas had stopped singing. A gentle mountain wind whispered in the tops of the pines, while leaves rustled on the ground below. A soft thump, now and then, indicated a pine cone or an acorn had just fallen. From the far, far distant valley, we could faintly hear the lonesome wail of a train whistle, the sound only made by my empty spot for home feel bigger. Someone else at Camp Friendship also heard the whistle. Instead of bringing thoughts of home, though, it brought feelings of distress and regret. Hopping freight trains and riding the rails had seemed an exhilarating adventure for a while, but now, having to scavenge for food and always wondering what danger lurked in every dark place, did not seem so attractive. No wonder such living was called a hobo jungle. As I told you, I didn't know anything about the interloper. All I knew was that Camp Friendship at night was nothing like Highland City. There were no streetlights, and I kept myself from looking too far into the dark woods. I thought I might see eyes shining back at me. A pair of eyes was looking at us, and they were full of disappointment and sadness. Every person with a rebellious spirit eventually comes to feel that way. Once we passed the stand of pines, I could see lights up ahead. One burned inside each washroom, and a floodlight served as a beacon for each lodge. The light was comforting, but the tar paper blackness of the lodges was nearly lost in the surrounding darkness. The lodges definitely looked cold and deserted. Thoughts of that cold, musty-smelling room and a chilly sleeping bag were not very welcoming. Why couldn't someone have gone ahead and built a fire in the pot-bellied stove? I thought. There I was in a complaining mood again. The only familiar thing was the night sky. Sometimes the trees opened up and we could see a few stars dimly twinkling. Did you ever wonder what the night sky must look like to God when He looks down on it from heaven? Sandy asked of no one in particular. I think God sees right through it and sees us, answered Miss Content. We are so insignificant and small in this universe, and yet God always sees us, each one of us. He cares about where we are and what we're doing, and He loves us. How great God is, Miriam said quietly. Maybe, mumbled Susie hard-heartedly. No matter what Susie said, it certainly was something to think about, and we all walked along quietly, the pine needles soft under our feet. When we came to the fork in the path, Mr. Franson said, Reginald, will you please come with me? Let's walk the ladies to their lodge. Yes, sir. It will be my pleasure to help you escort the girls to Queen Esther's lodge, he replied, with swelling chest. He even held out his elbow to Miss Content, so that she could take his arm. Mr. Thriftmore had a flashlight, so he led the rest of us toward David's hideaway lodge. We followed closely behind him in the inky darkness. The rest of us had left our flashlights in the lodge. The moon was skipping in and out from behind a few wispy clouds. J. Michael said it was a waning moon. We took his word for that. All I noticed was that it had a hazy ring around it. What's wrong with it? Asked Ronnie, gazing upward and almost tripping over a small tree branch the two of us had probably missed earlier. It looks sick. J. Michael shared more information. The hazy ring can sometimes be a prediction of inclement weather, he noted with his usual intellectual authority. As I must remind you, Mr. Franson warned that we might have intermittent rain showers tonight. Oh, you and Reginald always have an answer, accused Ronnie. Why do you think you know it all? Maybe there is just fog on the moon tonight. That was Ronnie, my buddy for the weekend. Why did he always have to be stirring up trouble? And why did he always have a bad attitude? I thought. Then my conscience gave me another jab. My attitude had not been the best either. But the moon has no atmosphere, protested J. Michael. Therefore, it can't have fog. Mr. Thriftmore knew it was time to intervene. Boys, we'll have this discussion sometime later. By now, Pastor Gentle was puffing his way up the sharp ridge to David's hideaway. For a moment I almost thought I could smell the faint scent of wood burning. That, too, brought thoughts of home. I remembered the same smell from my neighbourhood. Not that sweet smell of someone's barbecue on a hot summer evening, more like what you would smell on a cold, snowy night, when the neighbours are burning logs in their fireplaces. Somewhere, someone had a toasty fire. I wished I was there. The chill of the night air was getting to all of us, I suppose. I think it's going to be cold tonight, said Racer. Mum made me bring an extra blanket. I think I'm going to be glad I brought it. We have extra blankets for anyone who needs them, remarked Pastor Gentle, between huffs and puffs. Always be prepared, I say. Thank you for thinking ahead, said Acey. I think we will all need extra blankets tonight. Ronnie piped up again. Not me. I'm tough. In the shadows, our observer heard Ronnie's remark and whispered under his breath. How foolish, young man. I know, because I said the same thing myself 14 years ago. Well, I, for one, do not like to be cold, said J. Michael. By the way, is the washroom heated, Pastor? It's going to be cold taking showers tomorrow morning. The washroom is heated and the lodge will be toasty warm tonight. I'll bank the fire and then get up before you boys in the morning. Don't worry, we'll be fine. He was looking out for us really made me feel much more secure. Having passed the washroom, we were soon at the lodge, and Mr. Thriftmore opened the door. Even before he could flip the light switch, we could see a red glow coming from the pot-bellied stove. Who built the fire? Asked Booker. We were all surprised. How pleasant, remarked Mr. Thriftmore. Did you do this, Pastor Gentle? Yes, I had to bring my sleeping bag and things, so Mr. Frenson and I came up here while everyone was finishing up at the dining hall. I guess no one missed us. Anyway, we started the fire then so the lodge could warm up. I was liking him better all the time. Thank you, Pastor Gentle, said Acey. We really appreciate it. The room was comfortably warm. The fire in the pot-bellied stove had transformed a dark, cold, musty-smelling room into a cosy cabin, and I was very glad to see the bats were gone. Too bad the girls don't have a nice warm lodge, said Hapford. He was as kind-hearted and caring as Pastor Gentle. Oh, they do. We started a fire for them also. I hope they'll be as pleased as you are. I'm sure they will, said Mr. Thriftmore. Now, boys, get into your night clothes. Yes, added Pastor Gentle. Early to bed, early to rise, I always say. Mr. Thriftmore smiled. He knew Pastor Gentle was thinking what he was thinking. It wasn't going to be easy to get us all settled down for the night. Buddies can take turns going to the washroom before devotions, he said. Then, knowing our competitive natures, he had an idea to motivate us. OK, which buddies can set a record getting ready for bed? Ronnie took the challenge eagerly. Come on, Pudge, let's beat them. I don't know how, but the two of us did manage to win. The fact that most of our clean clothes were dragged out onto the floor in a scramble didn't seem important. We are first, yelled Ronnie, bouncing onto his bunk. That was important to him. For a second, I also thought it was pretty great to be first. Then I remembered what being first meant in this case. We would be the first to go out in the cold and in the dark to the washroom. Come on, Pudge, let's go, Ronnie continued, urging. Reginald is letting us use his flashlight. He flipped on the strong beam and practically dragged me out the door. Just by the way he held that flashlight, I knew he envied Reginald. As Pastor Gentle would have said, Ronnie's compass didn't hold a candle to that flashlight, but I knew Ronnie would have never admitted it. His compass was very special to him. As we stepped outside in our bathrobes, I shivered, but it was just from the chilly air. I didn't know why, but I had a feeling someone was watching us. And you know why now, don't you? Ronnie and I hurried to the washroom, which, as Pastor Gentle had promised, was warm and well lighted. We took our time inspecting the place and brushing our teeth. Finally, we headed back. Actually, the distance was only a few yards, but there were dark woods on both sides of the short, steep path. Was I ever glad we had Reginald's flashlight? It reminded me that Jesus is the light of the world, and I am so glad I have his light in my life. We were almost to the lodge when, off to the left, snap! Ronnie was leading and carrying the flashlight, of course. When we heard the snap, he automatically jerked the flashlight around toward it, shining the bright beam into the trees. I set off, glowing eyes blazed back at us. "A bear!" screamed Ronnie. He tore off to the lodge, leaving me in the blackness. I yelled, and Mr. Thriftmore came running with his flashlight. We heard some crashing through the brush, and when he shined the light in that direction again, we caught a glimpse of the white, raised tail of a deer. About that time, Mr. Friendson came running up the path. "What's the matter?" he asked breathlessly. "I heard screaming." When Mr. Thriftmore explained, all Mr. Friendson said was, "Well, I'm not surprised. I said there were plenty of deer around here. The poor thing was probably just looking for a place to bed down for the night." "Ronnie said it was a bear," explained Booker. "His eyes were big, and so were all the other boys' eyes." Mr. Friendson continued to reassure us. "Like I said before, I really doubt there are any bears around here." Well, I, for one, realised Mr. Friendson was not positive there was none. Maybe what we'd just met was not a bear, but that didn't mean there were no bears in these mountains. After all, something had broken into the kitchen and camp office. The way I reasoned, that would take something strong and clever, like a bear. I really don't know if Pastor Gentle had it planned or whether he changed his topic because of the circumstances, but after everyone had finished his trip to the washroom and we were settled down, the devotion consisted of each of us reading a scripture verse, telling us to either fear not or to be not afraid. Reading these verses was good mental exercise after our encounter with bears. It was the best bedtime medicine possible. Finally, we crawled into our sleeping bags. The fire was banked, and Mr. Friendson turned out the lights. A quiet hush came over the lodge. What a day! I tried to count how many times I had had to claim God's promises. As I thought about the curvy road, being lost in the woods, and bears, I went over in my mind the scripture verses we had read in devotions. God saying, "Fear not," really did make me feel calm and safe. Again, I thought how wise Pastor Gentle was to give us those verses to sleep on. I did wonder what Ronnie was thinking. He had really been afraid several times, but he did not have the Lord in his heart to comfort him. I was almost asleep when I heard sweet voices singing a chorus we had recently learned. "How can I fear? Jesus is near. He ever watches over me." It sounded like angels, but I never heard the rest of the song because I fell asleep before the song was finished. Evidently, Miss Content had also found a way to reassure Sandy, Christy, Susie, and Miriam.